What is going on, everyone? Thanks for watching my video today. Now, I've been doing a lot of NFL playoff talk on this channel recently, but today I want to shift gears a little bit and talk some more NBA stuff because February is coming up fast, and that means, you got the All-Star game coming up, which is always exciting, but more importantly, in my eyes, is the upcoming trade deadline because this NBA season, there's yet to be a real, true, obvious contender emerge. There's a lot of good teams that I think have a good shot at making a finals run, but that's because it's so up in the air, kind of like last year actually. Because you look at the Eastern Conference, that one seed's been traded around. You've seen Chicago and Brooklyn and Miami. Miami now owns the one seed after the last few days, and even I think the Sixers even had it for 2 days early in the year. The Bucks are still fighting to get back in it. They're the defending champs, so they're going to be in the race as well. Over in the West, it's been a race between Golden State and Phoenix for that number one seed most of the year, but you got Memphis and Utah also threatening to have deep playoff runs, and you got some other teams working their way back from injuries, trying to catch up as well. So overall, I think this trade deadline could be really impactful because I think maybe not. It doesn't need to be a big star getting moved at the deadline to really potentially change some of the destinies of these teams. It could be a small move that just allows one team to go from really, really good to potentially great with an extra guy on their team. So, with that in mind, I've got 5 players that I think really need to be traded at this upcoming deadline. And no, Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris are not part of this group because I don't think they're going to be traded. I think it's very unlikely they're going to be traded. Um, and if it happens, that's a whole other matter because that's really a Sixers centric story. I think there's only one or two teams where they can be going. So I'm not going to focus all in on them right now. Instead, I'm going to look at 5 non-Sixers that I think could really impact the where the league goes by the end of this year. And starting off with my list, I've got a guy who is a former Sixer, he was a Sixer for a very long time, and I think he still has quite a bit of playoff basketball left in the tank, and that is the San Antonio Spurs power forward Thaddeus Young. Last year with the Bulls, Thad Young had one of the best years of his career, even though he's getting up there in age. I think he's in his early to mid 30s now, but he had the best season of his career as a passer. He was really important for what the Bulls were doing on defense as a small ball five in some lineups, also playing the four at times in the starting lineup. He was traded in the sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan, which I think is, we've seen how great DeMar DeRozan has been. That was a no-brainer move for the Bulls to include him in that trade. But I thought going to the Spurs, I thought he was a Popovich guy. I thought Pop was going to love him, and he might. But I think Pop has embraced the rebuild in San Antonio. He's been playing the young players a lot, and that's left Thad kind of rotting on the bench. He plays, but he's only playing 14 minutes a night. He's given them 6 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. So if you look at that, and if he was playing more minutes, his production would probably be similar to what it was last year with the Bulls. But he's just not getting the run right now. The Spurs are not looking. They're probably not even going to make the playoffs. Maybe not even the play-in tournament. So I think the Thad Young needs to be on the trade market, and I think he will be. I'd be really surprised if some of these veteran teams don't go looking for him. When you look at teams that are struggling with their defenses, I think one team that could really use him is a team he used to play for, the Brooklyn Nets. And I'm not saying the Nets, they're not necessarily one of the worst defensive teams in the league, but I think they could definitely use some upgrade for those role player wings because guys like Paul Millsap, James Johnson, maybe they haven't necessarily met the expectations Brooklyn had for them coming into the Blake Griffin as well. All three of those guys, it's kind of weird that James Johnson is probably the best of those three, and now that's just where we are with the NBA these days. But all three of those guys haven't been as impactful as Brooklyn would hope, and I think Thad Young could really be an important potential crunch time lineup guy for Brooklyn. Two other teams, I think the Lakers just have to at least try to do something to get him. Their defense is so atrocious. I think if you plug Thad in with LeBron and AD, that could make the front court for the Lakers all of a sudden actually a lot better on defense. And Carmelo's minutes would probably go down. And maybe even this is another team he actually briefly played for, the Timberwolves. I think I like what the Timberwolves have been doing this year, but I think they need one extra veteran guy if they really want to make a run and get into the playoffs. I think they have a good shot anyway, but I think they could really benefit from having a veteran wing defender like that on the team, so they could also look for him. Now, the second guy I got on my list is Marvin Bagley, the former number 2 overall pick by the Sacramento Kings. He was selected over Luka Doncic. That will never not be a terrible pick, but that doesn't mean Bagley's career has to be thrown out the window just because he was drafted over a generational talent like Luka. Now, if you look at Bagley's raw numbers, especially the first 3 years of his career, he's about a 14.7 rebound guy. Now, granted, these are on some mediocre Kings teams, but he's not that bad of a player per se. Not a great defender, but he can definitely score in the low post, also makes threes at times. Now, he's had some injuries that have really limited his impact, and this year, it was really weird. He was kind of in Luke Walton's doghouse early in the year. He's out of the rotation. You got guys that I just think he's a better player than. Chimize Metu and Maurice Harkless were starting at power forward over him. He was having trouble getting playing time. Luke Walton gets fired, though, and now that Alvin Gentry's the interim coach, he's been playing. He's actually been starting recently, which is maybe a sign that the Kings won't trade him. But at the same time, I think his relationship in Sacramento has kind of sailed at this point. It's probably time for him to move. Now, this maybe doesn't fit the rest of the guys I have on this list. I'd be surprised if a contender was to trade for Bagley. I think maybe rebuilding teams like the Spurs, the Rockets, the Magic, the Thunder, whoever. Someone's got to take a chance on him and try to get his confidence back up and turn him back into a real NBA player. Right now he's putting up about 9 points in 22 minutes, which is about on pace for the 14 points he put up. He's been putting up in his career for 28 to 30 minutes a game. But maybe if a good team, I could see him on Brooklyn. I think he'd be a lot better than Millsap and Griffin, like I was saying. Now, they'd probably have to give up a lot more. Not a lot more, but they have to give a bit more to get Bagley than Thad Young. So maybe they don't go there. But either way, whether it's a young team or maybe a team that needs a big man who can score like Brooklyn, Bagley could be an important person to get moved at this deadline. Now, the third guy I got on my list, he's a former All-NBA player, and I thought he was going to have a really good season this year, but he hasn't played that much. That's Goran Dragic of the Toronto Raptors. Yes, he's on the Toronto Raptors. He was in the sign and trade with Miami that brought Kyle Lowry to the Heat. And I was really excited to see him with this Raptors team. I thought he would be Lowry's a better player, but I didn't think he was going to be a huge downgrade from Lowry. But he only played 5 games, didn't play that well, and then he left the team in late November with a personal matter. Now, I was looking at on the internet right before I made this video. It seems like he is being floated out there for trades. It's not like he's sitting out the entire season. It seems like at this point, maybe him and Toronto have just agreed that he's not going to come back because they've had a really interesting lineup without him. So if he's going to find a new team, there's 4 teams I've got written down that all could use him. I think the obvious one that everyone's been talking about for about 2 years now is Dallas. He has that relationship with Luka, both Slovenian players, and maybe they would want to play together. Dallas could use a better ball handler at the point guard spot opposite Luka. Well, Luka is the point guard, but another ball handler opposite him would really help. But some three other teams I have. First of all, Cleveland Cavaliers. They lost Colin Sexton. They lost Ricky Rubio. And, they made that hasty trade for Rondo, which I don't think was a terrible move, but they definitely need another point guard. And whether it's to back up Darius Garland or start opposite him like Colin Sexton was, either way, I think Goran Dragic would be a really good veteran presence. He would know where to get the ball at all these big men. I think he would be a really interesting piece for that team. I think J.B. Bickerstaff would love to have him as the floor general, kind of fill in the role Ricky Rubio had, because he's not the passer Rubio is, but he's definitely a better scorer. I think that balances off pretty well. And Garland has also improved as a passer this year, which has been interesting. And I gotta say, the Sixers could really use Goran Dragic. Now, this is discounting a potential Ben Simmons and or Tobias Harris trade. At that point, trading for Dragic isn't really a necessity because you'd probably be getting someone back in that trade, like, say, Tyrese Halliburton, if it was with the Kings. But if we're not going to trade Ben, I don't want to waste this Embiid year. Maybe we won't win the title, but I want to at least win a playoff series. I want Embiid to feel like all this hard work he's put in, Maxey as well, was worth it. We were at least trying to do something, and we've been winning a lot. I mean, there's a chance we could maybe move up to the 4 seed, get some home court advantage. I wouldn't want to give up someone like a Thibault or like someone young like that. But if you're looking at Toronto, I could see it's hard. Maybe they'd be interested in Shake Milton. They've also been they're very into those versatile wing types, which is probably why Thibault would be someone they wanted. I would obviously not trade him for Goran Dragic, but maybe like Charlie Brown, Charles Bassey, we can throw a protected first round pick. I'm not sure. Maybe it's unlikely that he goes to the Sixers, but I think he would be a really nice fit. Now, 4th on my list, another former Sixer. He's been putting up 20 points a game the last 2 years with the Pistons. That's Jerami Grant. And looking at Grant, he's 27 now. He's kind of in the prime of his career. We've seen him on both sides of the aisle with the Thunder and especially with the Nuggets. He was a really impactful role player as a 3-and-D guy. He's definitely a good off-ball defender, good shot blocker as well. And I think he can rebound pretty well when he's asked to. But he signed with Detroit and has gotten the taste on a bad team to be a number one option. He's been putting up 20 points a game on relative, not too inefficient, but he isn't exactly KD out there either with his field goal percentages. Now, Detroit is rebuilding, and maybe they want to keep him, but I think it'd be more beneficial to trade him. He doesn't really necessarily line up with the timeline of guys like Cade, and if you still consider Killian Hayes an important part of their core. But those guys, they're not really on the same time length. I think Grant would be a really impactful guy for one of these really good contenders to add. You look at the Bulls, they lost Patrick Williams, and they're also aching a little on defense with Caruso and Lonzo out for a couple months. I think a trade, just a first-round pick, Kobe White if the Pistons are interested in him, and maybe I believe Derek Jones is also on that team as a salary filler forward to kind of fill relatively the same role, at least possibly on defense, that Jerami has for the Pistons. I think that would be a trade maybe they would be interested in. He would really help the Bulls. I think the Bulls are already a really good team, but if you add him in there, then the Bulls have 6 guys that they can trust in the playoffs. Plus, if Ayo Dosunmu keeps playing the way he has, you could say 7. That would be a really good playoff rotation right there. And the other team, maybe they'd be scared to break this up because they're playing so well. But the Grizzlies, I know their chemistry. They go 11, 12 deep. They've got great players. But they're really in a nice position here. They're the 3 seed, and I think they've played great. They've competed with Golden State and Phoenix. I believe they beat Golden State at one point. I'm not really familiar with their record against the Suns, but they could certainly pull off an upset of one of those teams in the second round of the playoffs, whoever they draw that matchup against. And I think Jerami Grant, if you add him to this team, they have an even better chance. Now, this is where the philosophy of the Grizzlies franchise comes into question. So do they want to have these young guys, or do they want to embrace what Ja Morant is doing this year and try to go all in? So would a trade like maybe a potential first round pick, like a lottery protected first, throw in Zaire Williams, the 10th pick in this draft, who, he isn't exactly lighting the world on fire, but the Grizzlies keep playing him. They must see something in him that he's continued to be an important part of their rotation as a backup forward. And also you could throw Kyle Anderson in as a veteran that maybe the Pistons could flip for some more draft capital to another team. I think that would be a fair trade for Detroit and Memphis to make. Now, Grant's talent is probably worth more than that, but I don't believe he has too many years left on his contract. And like I said, he doesn't fit the Pistons' time frame. So I think that's a trade that they could be interested in making. And then you could say this is unlikely. It's probably almost as unlikely as a Ben Simmons trade, but I got to talk about Damian Lillard as my final guy. Portland, and I've been a Dame and CJ, let's be honest. I've been pulling for Portland every time they're in the playoffs. That the year when they beat the Thunder, made it to the Western Finals, was a ton of fun. I was rooting for them in the bubble as well to maybe beat the Lakers, which obviously was never going to happen. But that was a lot of fun. But we're about a decade into Dame's, I think a decade exactly, because 2012 was his first season. I think this is about it for Dame in Portland. I think we've seen the results this year, and even Dame himself hasn't played quite up to snuff. He's only shooting 40% from the field, 24 points a game. That's his lowest in quite some time. And he might say, "Oh, I want to stay in Portland. I want to be loyal for this fan base. I want to, leave my mark in Portland." He already has. Like if you took away Bill Walton's championship, Dame would already be the greatest Blazer of all time. And I think he's fulfilled his commitment to Portland. He's done all he can. It's time for him to ask out. Now, I say that as a Sixers fan who wants him, but I think at the same time, I'm going to be real. I think the ship has sailed for Dame, for Ben Simmons. I don't think that's a trade Portland would want. Now, the thing is, it might be unlikely that they make this trade this season because I'm not sure what they can get in the middle of the year. But I think the Sixers are still a logical destination. We'd probably have to throw in a lot more than just Ben and a couple picks. I'm not sure where that would lead, but I think it's time for Portland to go all in on a rebuild. McCollum should probably be traded as well. Maybe I should have picked him here instead of Dame as my final trade chip, but I think his collapsed lung might just keep teams away from him until the offseason for a potential trade. Another team I can think of for Dame, like I don't know where they would be going if they made this trade with him. It would kind of be like a new version of the Portland situation, but the Knicks, I mean, their standing in the league has improved now that they have Leon Rose as the president. They seem a lot more respected. Maybe Julius Randle, if he's transitioned into being the second option instead of the first option, he showed he could score the ball like a few other forwards last year. Maybe he can settle back into a similar statistical performance if Dame was on his team. And I think the Knicks will have cap space, and if not this offseason, the year after. They've signed a lot of short, like Nerlens Noel, Derrick Rose types. You know, they signed multi-year deals, but the salaries aren't off the charts. So maybe the Knicks could get a second star with Dame and Randall. Maybe you can call it a big three if Randall can get back to playing like how he was last year. You also have R.J. Barrett as a trade chip. Now maybe he would have to be in the Dame trade, but the Knicks I think would hope that they trade maybe like a quickly top-in picks package for Dame and then trade RJ for maybe a third star to pair with Dame and Randall. Um, I don't know. I don't know how realistic that is, but at the end of the day, I think Dame's time in Portland has ended, and we all can recognize that. Hopefully, Dame can recognize that soon and before it's too late. He might already be past his prime, but I'm hoping that his play this season is just a temporary struggle until he finds a new team. But that's going to do it for 5 guys that I really think need to be traded at this NBA trade deadline. Obviously, if Damian Lillard was traded, that could have a ripple effect on how the league shakes out this year. But even these other 4 guys could really pay dividends if they found a new team come playoff time. So thank you guys for watching the video today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. And hopefully the Sixers make some sort of trade at the deadline. I'm excited to see if that happens. In Morey we trust. So have a great rest of your day.